Hello, and thanks for agreeing to serve as a table host for the University of Denver's A Community Table, and welcome to this short training video on Table Host Facilitation Overview. I'm Thomas Walker, Director of DU Inclusion and Equity Education, one of this year's partner offices. I've been working with campus and community dialogues for almost 30 years, and I'm so glad to get the chance to share the power of talk with you all. One of your most exciting and important duties as a host is to set up and facilitate a casual discussion amongst your participants, exploring the topic you've selected as part of the larger initiative to connect community members in meaningful conversations about critical issues we all face. This video will cover some tasks and tips of the facilitation process overall. The next video will talk through details of your session's specific agenda content. If you have questions, please contact the Grand Challenges team. Information is in your host kit. You may not be the only host wondering. We'll get back to you as quickly as we can, and perhaps share the good information with all hosts. Let's get started. In short, facilitator responsibilities focus on supporting and enforcing three key elements of discussion: goals, roles, and rules. In this session, we'll cover each of them and offer some tips for several specific areas of facilitation, including participant types, asking good questions, pacing and timing, and intervening. The first key element is our goal, providing purpose and focus for your time together. As a facilitator, you'll want to be clear on and remind your participants of the session's topic and goal. Our goal for a community table is to explore the topic and generate ideas to increase local civic life involvement around it. Having and sharing a clear, common goal helps everyone focus toward the same end and provides you as a facilitator with a standard against which to measure whether a question or comment is useful and appropriate. If you're wondering whether something is relevant, you can ask yourself, or even ask participants, does that move us toward the goal? If the answer is no, then probably best not to ask or share it, best to cut it off, or perhaps ask the speaker to restate more in line with our goal. Note what the goal is not, in case you need to remind yourself or participants. Our goal is not to teach everyone about the topic or to create an action plan to solve it. So we don't want folks trying to be or become experts or to carry the pressure of solve all solutions. We're having a discussion, not a course on a topic, a gripe session, a debate, or forming a task force. And so how we communicate, a friendly, casual discussion, will be different here than how we engage in many other settings toward other goals. And your job as a facilitator is to keep it from going the wrong way. The second key element of discussion is having rules or a framework. To help reach our goal and remain in that constructive conversational space, it is also helpful to name our expectations for one another openly rather than assuming them. In short, to have some rules. You and participants may have heard these called various things in other settings, such as ground rules, guidelines, group norms, learning agreements, etc. In keeping with the casual tone of a community table, we're going with discussion guidelines. These guidelines frame our conversation, like scaffolding for safe construction or bumpers for guaranteed success bowling. They help name and remind us that we are creating a different kind of communication space than most of us are normally involved in, and they allow everyone to better manage their own participation constructively. Here are a few of the guidelines we suggest you set as you begin your session. First, one speaker at a time. Especially given our online setting, taking turns and not speaking over one another will be important just to be able to follow what's being said. 2. Share to increase understanding and to invite others in. We're not grading people, there are no points awarded, and it's not otherwise a competition or debate. So all of our focus, all of our sharing should be on constructive engagement. Passion is fine, and these are real-life issues. We hope people are passionate about them, but we don't need arguing or personal attacks to reach our goal. Third, listen to understand, not to find faults in others' experiences or sharing. And in fact, we may need to listen harder when we don't agree than when we do. Fourth, speak from your own or our own personal experience. Use I statements. We want to avoid generalizations and absolutes like all people do this or you should do that. We're experts in our own experience, not necessarily subject matter experts. Next, it's okay to disagree. Since we're here to share and learn, not to make decisions or change minds, we don't need to convince or judge others or argue points. That's not our goal. Be attentive to what space we're taking up. We need the facilitators and participants to think about how often, how quickly, and for how long we speak. We can ask ourselves, are we adding something new or additional versus repeating something that's already been shared or is well known? We want people to lean in or lean out depending on their usual inclination in situations and based on what's already been shared. If I normally am someone who speaks often, maybe this is a chance for me to sit back and make space for others. If I'm a quieter person, maybe this is my chance to lean in, to share more and put myself out there more. It's helpful sometimes to consider the acronym WAIT, W-A-I-T. Ask myself, why am I talking? Finally, what's said here stays here, what's learned leaves, or confidentiality. We're asking people to share personal stories and details, and when they share those with us, they don't become ours to share. From this party, regifting is rude. We do want people to talk about their experience and the lessons they've learned, just not share details of who was there or said what. The third key element of discussion are roles and responsibilities that go with them, and it's important to stop and make sure everyone is clear on whose responsibilities, whose roles, or what, in order to reach our goal. Neither you nor participants are expected to be subject matter experts on the topic. What brings us to the table is our interest in engaging the topic because it affects us all in some way. Therefore, we each have a role to play within the rules toward our goal. Participants should contribute to mutual learning, share from personal experience and opinion, self-manage themselves and their contributions toward the goal and within the guidelines. See the pattern here? As a facilitator, you also have some particular duties and authority around these issues, specifically to enforce the goal, roles, and rules, those guidelines, to focus on process over content, keeping the group going rather than speaking about expertise on the topic. And perhaps most helpful around this are the 3 O's. Your job as facilitator is to ensure the group is 1, on topic, focused on the relevant content, 2, on time, you cover everything in your given time, and 3, providing opportunity for all to participate. The 3 O's, on topic, on time, opportunity for all. Ultimately, the facilitator should intervene the minimal amount to support the 3 O's and not more. We really want the bulk of the time to be amongst the participants, sharing with each other as we move through the 5 prompts we'll provide. Having covered the 3 key elements of discussion, goals, roles, and rules, we also want to briefly share some tips around several other areas of facilitation as you help the group manage its conversation around the topic. Here are some of the topics and tips to consider as your discussion rolls on. First, participant types. Even with the guidelines, you want to be mindful of who's taking up space, centering themselves, argument, or otherwise within your group. Some people are just naturally talkers, and we can appreciate their conversation and then invite in new voices to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to share. I might say something like, "That's another great point, Thomas. Thanks for sharing. I wonder who else has some thoughts." This lets Thomas know he's been heard while making space and holding space for other voices to jump in. You might also say, "For this next question, I'd like to invite folks we haven't heard from as much to go first." That names for the group out loud explicitly that we're inviting in those voices we haven't heard as much from. At the other end of the spectrum, you might have quiet members who need to be invited in or at least acknowledged. You might actually say, Thomas, we haven't heard from you in a bit. Any thoughts on what we're talking about now? We don't want to put pressure on people, but we may need to help carve out space for our shyer folks or more reflective folks to make sure we benefit from their contributions. You might also have the expert or know-it-all. And as again, we're not really focusing on content expertise here. It's more about people's experience and perspectives. In this case, you may need to intervene a little more strongly, appreciate what they're sharing, and remind everyone that we're here for ideas and experiences, not lessons or lectures. Think about what other types you have seen or maybe even have been in discussion groups you've been part of, and think about how you can apply the goals, roles, and rules to keep all of those different types of participants focused on the goal. Another good tip for facilitating the conversation is to be ready to ask good questions. We'll provide you with 5 main questions or prompts for you to ask that we need to make sure that you cover, as well as providing some follow-up questions and some talking points for each of those to help you keep the conversation going. If you do need to help the conversation moving beyond these, again, toward the goal and within the guidelines, you can encourage more good sharing by asking some good questions. For example, some more useful good questions are open-ended questions versus close-ended questions. Close-ended questions are multiple choice, basically. They have a set number of options or answers already implied by it. So yes or no questions, agree or disagree questions, or multiple choice. They're good at getting information, but not really getting the conversation or keeping the conversation going. Rather, you want to ask open-ended questions that don't have implied sets of answers. So rather than saying, does anybody else want to share on this? That's a close-ended question, yes or no. You might ask, who else would like to share on this? Or what other experiences do people have that they can share? Those are more open-ended, keeping the conversation flowing. You might also ask clarifying and or probing questions that have the goal of tell us more, not moving immediately on to the next person, but, Thomas, could you say a little bit more about that? I'd like to make sure I understand, or can you clarify this point, or let me make sure I understood. Those let people know that they've been heard and keep the conversation moving rather than people just responding to your prompts. Less useful questions in this particular situation will be those close-ended ones like, does everyone agree or who agrees with whatever was said? Our goal isn't to come to agreement, so that's not really a relevant question. And getting into agreement and disagreement can set up a tension in your group that won't be helpful toward hearing from everybody and generating ideas. Instead, you might ask who else has similar or differing experiences they can share. That adds some diversity to the what's been shared without getting into judgment calls around it. Pacing and timing can also be important. While you don't have an absolutely set time for a community table, you can't have it go on forever, nor do we want it to be done in 5 minutes. So here are some tips to think about keeping that pacing, that timing, that flow going. First, and this is a critical one, that not everyone needs to speak to every single point or question. We don't have time, if you have 5 main prompts and 10 participants, for everybody to spend 2 or 3 or 5 minutes sharing in response to each of those. That would add up to hours and hours of total time. Importantly, everyone's had the opportunity to speak if they wish to, and we've covered a good range of topics before moving on to the next question. Not that we've exhausted the topic and everyone in the group for every single question. Second, be okay with some silence. Silence can allow everyone, especially your more internal thinkers and processors, to consider the question and gather their thoughts. It can also help reinforce particularly powerful or passionate sharings rather than rushing past them. Don't be afraid to ask everyone to wait, or even instruct everyone to take a moment to think about it before opening the floor to responses. This provides some variety within the group as well, and can keep the conversation at a more leisurely pace rather than a rapid fire who can speak next practice. But silence doesn't have to be a bad thing, and many of us, facilitators included, will feel pressure to fill it. Don't always have to do that. Let some things sit. Next, it's okay to cut off sharing and move to the next question or item. From the very beginning, you want to set yourself up as an authority, as a facilitator who may need to interrupt to bring us back to our topic, to stay within our ground rules, or to keep us moving. And so it can be important for you to let people know in the moment as well, I'm going to interrupt you because we need to move on, not because I don't like what you're saying. But your job as a facilitator is to intervene. I find it helpful to narrate my flow, summarizing a few points and transitioning to the next topic. You might say something like, thank you all so much for sharing about topic X. We heard ideas such as neighborhood level e-newsletters and event calendars, quarterly potlucks or street parties, whatever that might be. Thinking about all that, now we're going to turn to our next question. This signposting, it's called signposting, helps participants follow the move away from our previous topic and on to the next one. It clearly signals we're done with what we were just talking about. It's time to move to the next one. Summarizing makes people feel heard, and then you say, we're moving on. That way people can follow along as you move them along. Last tip is intervening. As we mentioned on the last slide, your role is to intervene, to enforce the guidelines toward the goal. Own it, do it, intervene. It can be gentle, but it needs to be firm. I find it helpful to cite or repeat the goal and the ground rules when I'm intervening, to give reasons for why I'm jumping in or cutting off or moving on, as I mentioned. Again, emotion is fine, in fact wonderful, personal attacks are not. So if people are getting too wound up or emotional, much less straying into a personal attack or overly negative kind of space, we can acknowledge those passionate feelings are there. Sounds like a hard experience. Sounds like you had a bad experience. And bring it back to, so what do we do with that? How does that inform our engagement of our issue? We want to keep it on the positive, which doesn't mean we don't talk about the bad. We just keep moving in a constructive way. You nicely do what you need to do for the goal, the roles, the rules, and the 3 O's. That's your job as the facilitator. But whatever you do, explain why. Being transparent about why you're intervening, or sitting in silence, or moving on, or taking a little more time can be very helpful for your participants to understand that there's a reason why you're doing what you're doing, and that it relates to why we're all gathered. Everyone's already agreed to the roles, goals, and rules, and to the topic, so you're just doing your job for the table's larger good. Please do it. So those were just a few key elements of facilitation and tips for facilitating your group that should help you manage the passion through a great conversation towards some great ideas. You've hopefully invited people interested in the topic and in sharing ideas with others on it. So motivating them to engage shouldn't be your challenge. Rather, we hope your largest hurdle is keeping them focused and not talking for hours. In the next facilitation video, we'll talk through the session itself, from welcome and introductions through the 5 main prompts to wrapping up. So please be sure to check that out. And if you've got questions, again, please contact the Grand Challenges team. Their contact information is in your host kit, so that we can get back to you and perhaps share commonly asked questions and answers with other people. And do keep reviewing and thinking about and preparing for your session. We look forward to facilitating with you, and stay tuned for the next video.